Welcome to Level Up. I'm Sherelle.
And I'm Danny, and this is the podcast where we talk about health, fitness, and mindset. The art of glute training, today's episode.
Yeah,
Clickbait.
well, glutes is very much a hot topic on the internet always, especially in the health and fitness world. And we've done an episode in the past about the science of glute training, and you guys loved it. So we thought we would go into a little bit more detail about the art of glute training.
There's very much a difference, and when we were writing the show notes for this, we were reflecting on the difference between science being quite linear, structured, black and white, whereas art, creative, thinking outside the box, and very, you can't really put methods to it. So it is important to use both science and artistic natures when coaching someone, because everyone is so different. And I've really noticed, or we've both really noticed, that on the internet, there's a lot of science-based and evidence-based practitioners and coaches who love reading, love studying, good on them, but they don't have any clients, or they don't train, or they haven't stepped in the gym. So it's kind of like, great, you know how to read a study, but where is your real life practical experience? And that's what we're really proud about. You know, we've been in the gym for over a decade, and we've been working with clients. So yeah, today's episode is really about the art of coaching rather than just us spitting facts at you.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like if you're a personal trainer or like just someone that loves training and like building your body, or a competitor or a coach yourself, like it's so important to understand the science, but the practical application is so important. Like you said, there's a lot of people that are just reading studies and like reciting conclusions and making content, but they don't have like the proof behind them. One, of working with people and actually generating that result. But then the second thing, like what actually motivates people? Like compliancy is one of the biggest issues when it comes to coaching in general or personal training. So it's not always about the most optimal thing to do, right? And we need science, of course. We need evidence-based literature to be able to guide us in the right directions. But both Danny and myself have definitely had like experiences training ourselves. I mean, we're both bikini pros. Glute training was a big part of our preparation to be able to, work towards that. But then the second part is every client that comes to me wants to grow their glutes, and it's a little bit of the science, of course, but then it's also like, well, what does that look like? What are the key considerations that you need to be making in the gym that are not only realistic but also practical?
Totally. Realistic and practical, the two forgotten things where, people who are so stuck in literature, they don't remember that they're the two fundamental aspects. Your client, yes, it's about giving them a great program on paper, but they have to actually understand it and do it. Yep. And the thing is with literature, there's not one study on every single scenario. Studies take years, they cost millions. Every single scenario is impossible to be researched because you need a different sample size, you need different control groups, you need different outputs. So yeah, you can't actually, for the people that say, where's the study on that? Well, we don't want to spend $2 to $3 million in 10 years of our life actually writing a study for you to then go, oh, okay, it actually works. What about actual client results?
It drives my gears when like you might say something and someone's like, oh yeah, where's the study? I'm like, shut up. Like I get it, but why is that a cop out for everyone? Or like even on TikTok, like the latest thing is like if you post something and maybe you're talking about rest pause sets or volume or intensity or tempo, like things that you just like I wouldn't have thought were debatable. You'll get people tag other people in it to be like, can you just proof check this and make sure it's legit?
God.
Like just make sure this little girl knows what she's talking about. That's what I feel like. But it's like we need to be like a bit more, I don't know, holistic in the way that we're showing things, because we need to be taking like literature for what it is, evidence and things that we should be guiding principles off, but not like matter of fact. There's going to be like different ways of doing things, and there's a lot of people out there that have just simply trained hard for a long period of time and they don't have all the whiz bang stuff and all the different angles and all the optimized training, and they've still got great results, right? So it's a little bit of both. And I think like from my sort of coaching experience, sometimes we can just be like obsessing over the stuff that doesn't matter. And I think that's where it's really important to zoom out and come back to the things that really do matter, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Like, we're going to talk about a lot of the main things when it comes to, like, of course, how to develop this muscle, because there's a lot of BS on the internet, right? There's a lot of stuff that you're like, that doesn't even like intellectually makes sense of why that would even grow any muscle. I don't know why the glutes just all of a sudden take that out the window, but I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper and break down some of the myths, and then also give like you guys something practical to take away from today.
Totally. And we love glutes, not only for aesthetics, it's fundamental. Like, for people to be attracted to a partner, you know, we do look at the glutes, because that means great mating experience. Not great mating experience, but like you'll be able to be a good childbearing mother, you know?
Yeah.
That was meant to sound better than what it came out with, you know, but it means you're athletic. You've got childbearing hips. So yes, aesthetics is one thing from an innate nature, but injury rehab, you know, recovering from an injury largely requires glute training, performance, okay? There are so many other elements aside from aesthetics that we really want to highlight around the glutes, rather than, oh yeah, that glutes look great, because someone could never train a day in their life and still have great glutes because of their genetics, body fat distribution, how wide their hips are, their femurs, you know, BBL, you know, there's so much in it that people are forgetting. So you mentioned beautifully that people get too caught up in the nitty gritty of it, right? The 1%ers, where we've forgotten about genetics. We've forgotten about all these larger details that actually make up someone. So someone with a BBL might walk in on TikTok. You know, I don't go on TikTok that much, but it sounds pretty cutthroat. So, and claim that this one exercise did it. And unfortunately, people will believe them. Yeah. It's crazy.
And if you call any of that out, like, you are really shot down on socials. It's like, it's so taboo, right? But it is a fact. Like, genetics and body fat distribution really do make a big difference. Some people just store body fat in the right places as well, right? And I also wanted to highlight, like, glutes aren't just a girl's muscle. Do you know what I mean? Like, guys that have strong developed legs and glutes, like, that's attractive for women too. And as you mentioned, like, injury prevention, like power, strength, like, they're all indicators that not only do they know what they're doing in the gym, but they are also like strong individuals as well, and healthy and fit. Look, not always, but from an evolutionary standpoint.
Totally. A lot of my lower back patients who are males, and knee pain, we get them doing glute movements. And yes, there is still a little bit of a stigma around it. I mean, I don't really prescribe like cable kickbacks and abductions to the guys, because they just don't really feel confident. But a hip thrust, yes, you know, squat, deadlift, hip hinge, lunges, all of that. But, you know, hopefully as time goes on and with the use of these platforms, you know, there won't be traditional male versus female exercises.
No, absolutely. Because I know the hip thrust in general over the last sort of 6 to 12 months is like really copped it on the internet for being like the girls' exercise, or just not being effective. And there was a recent study that came out that Brett Contreras, who's like the founder or the god of, the inventor of the hip thrust, where they showed that hip thrusts were just as effective for building the glutes as back squats. Because, you know, on the internet, a lot of people sort of say, you know, the king of all exercises is a barbell back squat, and they're more effective for building muscle mass. But obviously this one study showed that they were just as effective, except obviously you didn't build quads or adductors along with it as well. And I think it's so important to be able to, again, look at the evidence, but then go, did we need that study to know it? You know what I mean? Like, girls have been hip thrusting for a while. We've been saying how effective they are. So I feel like, again, it comes down to like, yeah, the science is helpful, but we just have to look back in history too, and be able to take our experiences of what we've done in the gym and with our training, like, just as serious. And I think people don't do that. They go, oh, well, there's no study behind it, nothing to prove it, doesn't matter. It's like, why did he have to spend like probably $1 million on this study for that to be known, when women have been saying that for a while? I mean, like, glutes, I hand on my heart say that exercise, a hip thrust, was the one thing that actually made my glutes grow initially, because I stopped getting back pain. I learned how to go through hip extension, and I learned how freaking strong I was. Like I learned I could load up and hip thrust 150 kilos. So there's a lot more to it when it comes to like the art, right? And I don't know if you agree with any of that, but that's what I really want to get into today.
Totally. When you said you were going to, recall the latest study on glutes, I go, oh, here we go.
Ah!
I go, who's it by? You said Brett Contreras. I go, okay, hands down,
Done.
it is 100% correct
Yep.
because he created the movement. I feel like that study perhaps would have had to happen to them, show people who would say, where's the study? Well, now he can go, fine, here's your pieces of paper that you wanted, even though for years and years and years we've known it was such a great glute builder. But it's all context dependent because then you do have people who do squat and deadlift and who don't hip thrust who have great glutes as well. But I personally, and like what you said, when we started hip thrusting, our glutes grew. I just find it such an easy exercise to target, when performed correctly, of course, to target the glutes without so many variables, and you're working against gravity, which is one of the main differences between squatting, which is vertical. Hip thrust, you're lying horizontal. So it's really hard at the top of the movement because you're going against gravity. And then you're not bringing in as much of the surrounding muscles. Like with a squat, you need upper back tension, which means you need shoulder mobility, and then you need strong quads. You need all these other things, balance, that might break down before you actually get to achieve the movement and glute growth. So the hip thrust and its variations, regressions and progressions, are my number one go-to when trying to teach someone how to utilize their glutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, you can really load up, and it's like an isolated exercise too. So as soon as things turn compound and there's more joints and more movements, it's more complex, right? So it's easy to be able to teach someone how to go through hip extension, like you said, with something like a hip thrust or a glute bridge or a kick back or something that's really isolated that they can feel the muscle, because that's important when you're learning, is like being able to feel what muscle you're training. And even for me, like squats, hack squat, leg press, like everything burns. Do you know what I mean? Like it just all burns. Whereas when you're isolating exercise with like a hip thrust, you can really feel it. And I guess that sort of moves into the first point that we wanted to speak about, being exercise selection, and how important that is. Like if your goal is to grow your glutes, you've got to use the right tool for the right job. And everyone's going to have their, I guess, what's the word, their preferences, I guess, with exercises as well. And I know that we're all different, we're all built different as well, but there is main exercises that are built off how the glutes function in general.
Totally. So it's really important to consider that there are 3 glute muscles: glute max, glute med, glute min. They're all the abbreviations: minimus, maximus, medius. And now, although you cannot actually separate the glutes, so, you might hear people on Instagram, this is glute med only, get your glute min, which is pretty much impossible because it's like right under the glute med. They all work in sync.
Why would you want to isolate that anyways?
I don't know, clickbait sounds different, reinventing the wheel somehow. But yes, you can put your client or yourself in positions that bias certain actions, like hip extension is primarily glute max, or abduction and external rotation primarily glute med, but you will still get glute max involved. So it's actually impossible, because they're also interconnected, it's impossible to separate them. So every time you hear this is only glute max, only glute med, you know that it's not actually correct. It can be dominant and biased because of the movement pattern and the angle. However, you actually can't separate them. They all love working in together. Yeah,
and it's good to know that, right? Because it's important to understand that when you are choosing exercises. Something that is a little bit of an ick for me that I like scroll on socials and see is like when people say the best exercise for building glutes, right? And I totally understand what they're trying to say. They're trying to say the best exercise for them, or their favorite exercise, or maybe what you should be doing, or whatever. There's a lot of other hooks that you could probably use, but as soon as someone says the best exercise, I know it's for clickbait. Like I know it's not the best exercise because there's no such thing, right? But exercise selection for building any muscle is super important. But as you mentioned, there's 3 main types of glutes, or 3 different glute muscles, and we need to be hitting all of them, but you're going to be hitting all of them when you're doing most of the movements as well. So it's just about making sure that you're choosing exercises that you're confident in, like that skill acquisition is really important, but then also exercises that you can push intensity on, right? And I know that we can probably both agree, Danny, but building muscle is friggin' hard work. And most people underestimate how long it takes. Like, I honestly think, how old am I now? 29. It's taken me probably 8 years to build muscle mass, or a level of muscle mass where I'm like, I look fit, like I look like I train, right? Like I've actually got a decent amount of muscle mass, and I'd be okay to sit here. Whereas, like, you know, maybe when I was in my first couple of years of training, I was like wanting to grow and grow and grow and just put on more muscle mass, especially obviously glutes, which is what we're talking about. But it took years to be able to develop muscle tissue. And I think, like, yes, exercise selection is super important, but like exercise selection and consistency for a long period of time. Like, we shouldn't be just changing things all the time when it comes to exercise selection. We just need to remember that consistency piece is super important.
Yeah, I think people are getting a little bit confused because there are so many exercises out there, and it's like, how do I choose the right one for me?
I feel like, is there really that many exercises? There's like categories, I guess, and then there's like variations.
Well, yeah, variations of the movement patterns. But for example, you know, we've both filmed exercise libraries. There are hundreds and hundreds of videos in there. It's like, you know, we did a glute encyclopedia alone. There are 150 different glute exercises. Yeah. So people get confused, or they get distracted. They're like, ooh, I'm gonna try this one. I wanna try this one. I saw that on Instagram. Let's do it. I'm bored of that one now. Let's add that in. So they're doing too much, and it's not consistent enough, because just like learning how to ride a bike, you get on that same damn bike and you practice day in and day out until it becomes a skill. So less is more, and we always say it, less is more when it comes to exercise selection, when it comes to days in the gym. You know, we need to actually treat our training seriously like an athlete and put that application into certain movement patterns until we master it, until we earn the right to do all the fancy stuff.
Yep, absolutely. When you say fancy stuff, what do you mean by that? Like, what's fancy to you when you think about glute training?
Good question. I mean, I don't really use the word fancy, actually. It was more quoting people on Instagram. And now you see the memes where they're like riding a unicycle with a barbell on, and then they're holding a bench up, and it's getting all crazy. So thank you for catching me out on that. I actually don't think any exercise is fancy, but people sort of use that when maybe it's on one leg, or there's a new piece of equipment, or they're doing two movements in one, like a squat and a freaking bicep curl. You know, people are drawn towards that, and if you want to get good at that movement, practice it. If that movement will help your goals, practice it. But it shouldn't always be the aim to progress and remove stability and you know, make it heavier and put all of the methods of progressive overload in one exercise. That shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal should be your actual goal, why you started training in the first place.
A lot of you guys listening will be probably a little bit younger than me as well, maybe some of you guys listening, but when
not that bloody old,
I know, I can't pretend.
You're only 29.
In my wisdom. But when we first started training, the hip thrust didn't really exist, did it? Like, can you remember? When I first started lifting, I don't remember doing a hip thrust for the first, I don't even know. Did you start with a hip thrust?
No way.
I can't remember when it was invented. I don't know what the year was, but it wasn't around
I don't want to misquote it, but it wasn't that long ago. Yeah.
Go on, have a go. No,
I'm not going to have a go because I actually did go to Brett Contreras' course in Sydney.
So you should know this.
His workshop. Well, I was helping sort of set up and work, so I wasn't sitting as a student, but that's when I really delved into the hip thrust and what it was and got to try it for the first time. And yeah, it was phenomenal. But I think that was in either 2016 or 2017 where I went to that, and I remember we found our first glute drive up in Queensland.
Oh, I remember that.
I was looking at the videos
now, and I'm like,
we thought it was the best thing in the world, and to this day it's my favourite machine.
Horrendous. I'm in mad lumbar extension on that.
Our technique was shocking. We had our little cute bander, which I still love doing banded glute drive, but like 20 kilos either side. We're in comp prep, we're stick thing, we're tiny humans, but we had just discovered this new machine together and this new movement. It was really like, it was transformational.
Yeah, but it's so weird to think about that now, because if you buy a glute program online, there's no way it doesn't have a hip thrust in it. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But when we first started, and as you said, less is more, that just sort of like prompted me to think. But when I first started training and writing my own programs, or, you know, I used to go on T-Nation or bodybuilding.com and like download leg programs and things like that, they were just so much quantity over quality. Like, it was lots of exercises, lots of volume, lots of sets and lots of reps. no sort of like consistency, like the programs would change too frequently, exercise selection would change a lot. So I feel like when I look at it now, how I write programs, it is about like what is the minimum effective dose, because I know that the main stimulus for muscle growth is going to be intensity. So how can I make sure that you're getting enough intense volume but not too much, because we don't want to burn yourself out. So when I was thinking about exercise selection, it's interesting to reflect on how your own training changes over the years. And no surprise, like back then I had a pancake ass. Like that was that. Whereas now it's like the opposite, right? So it's not a surprise. It's like, oh, that's why. Do you know what I mean? I was doing it wrong. I wasn't doing it right. Like I was just really chasing the burn, and I was just doing lots of sets and lots of reps, no real intensity, poor exercise selection potentially, no hip thrust. So there's definitely little things that you can pick up on when it comes to exercise selection. And I just generally feel like you find the movements that work for you as well. Like there's certain exercises that, no exercise is a must. You don't have to do any exercise. You can replace that with a different movement pattern or the same movement pattern but different machine or different sort of variation. But you just have to find the variations that actually work for you and stick to them for long enough. Like so many people change their A series too frequently. And I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, Danny, but I'd love to hear your opinion. I can leave an A series in for like 12 plus weeks, like a back squat, an RDL, a hip thrust, and just make tiny changes to progressive overload over a longer period of time until I get to a point like what I did with my Romanian deadlifts, where I was like, I'm too strong on this, that my upper back is actually letting me down. Like at what point is like RDLing that much weight helpful? Like, you sort of got to pick and choose. But exercise selection, we have to be sticking to them for long enough as well.
Totally. It depends if you're talking to someone who takes their training quite seriously and has, goals that revolve around body composition or injury rehab or something like that, compared to people who just come in the gym for the social aspect, just to get them off the couch, maybe for mental health, because some people also get really bored.
Yeah,
now,
that's true.
It's easy for us to say, well, change that, change your mindset and just do the work, which easier said than done. But for some people, they like that variety. But I think it's important for everyone to question themselves, well, why am I training? Because yes, to get that outcome, you do have to stick with the same movement patterns and the variations that suit you for a long period of time. You and I definitely do that. Powerlifters do that. Someone learning a new skill does that. But then if you're someone who loves going to classes and mixing it up, then they will not be able to stick that much. So in that case, what I would do is then, to use the phrase of the A series, so the first exercise, give them a variation but of the same movement pattern, just so they feel like they're doing something different. Yes, it might be a little bit different, but it's still the same underlying movement pattern. Depends who you're talking to.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because like you said, I'm like, I will do the boring work. Like I will stick to the same program. I will stick to the same exercises, and I'll add 2 freaking kilos a week, and it feels mundane, but then looking back. But as you said, that's the art of coaching, right? Compliance and motivation is important, guys. And not only for ourselves, like I noticed for me that I was losing a little bit of motivation, and training was just becoming a bit flog, just Groundhog Day getting back in. So I just changed to a full body split, and now I'm like, love it. This is the best thing ever. So, but kept a lot of the same exercises as well. So that's the art piece that, like, yes, you can know what's most effective and what's going to work eventually, but especially when it comes to like your clients, like you do have a responsibility to keep them engaged and keep them motivated and make sure that they are feeling like they're making progress away from weight on the bar, because if we only dictate it to strength, that can't always go up, etc. So we need to make sure that we're not just looking at one variable, we're looking at like humans as a whole, especially if you are coaching.
Totally. I think it's actually easier to stick to a rigid plan than learn how to get results while being flexible, while accounting for life events happening to you, and not beating yourself up if you missed a day or at the gym, because you hear one side of the story where people can't stick to a program, but then I think it's actually easier to stick to a program than to get results while being flexible. When we're new, often we just take everything very literally. And I remember when I started, whatever was handed to me, whether it be training, nutrition, I would follow that to a T, right? But then that's quite limiting. Although you get the results, you can't maybe go out for dinner, or you can't stay up late because that'll affect your training session. But to be able to mix and match your programming, like how you change to full body, like that is fantastic based on the scenario that you're in right now. And that is how we stay training forever. We learn how to adapt with our life and priorities as we grow, but still prioritizing training, but it looks different according to life events. I think that's the real art in it as well.
Yeah, I've really noticed that in myself, like over the years, like both personally and then as a coach, where like when I started, it was like, no, this is the way we do it. Like we do it this way. Or like you said, it's like, oh, if I had a sore back and it's deadlift day, like it's deadlift day.
Totally.
You're not gonna swim around. Like I do think that at the start we are rigid before we become flexible. Like I think we have to learn to be rigid before we can invite flexibility in and be okay with that physically and mentally as well. It's the whole, your environment. Do you know what I mean? If things are controlled, you're going to have a better outcome with when things are flexible. But if we only have perfect scenarios, then we're never going to be able to adapt when life happens, because it does, right? And I think we've both learnt that. But yeah, I was just even thinking like how much I just used to be, oh, well, no, I've still got 4 weeks left on this program. Like you're not swapping out to a full body split. No way, you know? But now I'm like, oh, you know, when you've got knowledge that sort of like invites that, doesn't have to be one way. And knowledge gives us flexibility. Like when you think about why we feel rigid and restricted, it's because we don't know there's another way. So it's like, oh no, I must stick to this meal plan. I must stick to this training program, not realizing like, oh, energy balance, and I can probably swap this out, or I can do this. And that's the art of coaching, right? Is being able to give knowledge to other people so you can collapse time and actually enjoy the process. Like everyone says that, but that's really what enjoying the process means. For me, anyways.
Totally. And when it comes to actual exercise selection, you know, you do get people saying, oh, you can't do this exercise, don't do that, it's a bad exercise. But we believe that, and actually like a good coach can find a scenario for each exercise. So there needs to be more context around, well, if you think that's a bad exercise, cool, but for who? Like people don't actually elaborate. So that is also confusing people, because some people love, you know, hip hinging. Some people love the Jefferson curl, which is flexion under load. Well, okay, cool. You need to be able to find a scenario for each, rather than just saying, no, this is good, this is bad. There's still too much of that going without context. But essentially, as a coach, you need to look at your client as an individual. Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? And it's your job to actually give them the movements they're avoiding within reason. Now, I'm not saying everyone should do a Jefferson curl, for example, but maybe 1 out of 100 clients you see might actually need that. So it's your job to be able to recognize, my client is not very strong in this movement pattern or this position. That's what I need to give to them. But then they're going to hate it, because if we're weak at something, you're going to hate that movement. A lot of people hate lunges, for example. So it's our job to give them what they need while educating them, so then they will adhere to the movement that they don't actually like and flip their mindset around it too. It's not just about making fun programs for your clients that they're going to love and say, oh, you're the best coach. It's like, no, they actually came to get results. You need to give a little bit of that tough love and give them the movements that they've been avoiding for their whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. On our induction form for new clients, it always says, like, is there any exercises that you don't like? I just ask it for fun. And it's always lunges. And I'm like, so we're having lunges in your program. Like, it doesn't mean that you don't get lunges. It just tells me what you're avoiding, and therefore what you probably need more of. And then it's the coach's responsibility to be able to figure out why they don't like it. Like usually it's poor technique, pain, maybe they've had a negative experience with that exercise, they just don't know how to do it, they're incompetent at it, whatever it might be. Figure out why and then fix it, right? Like one of my favorite things with training is that there's always something to work on as well. And if you're ever a master at something, like you probably need to broaden and, you know, stretch yourself in other areas as well. And I just think that's so important, because so many people avoid the things that they should do. And then they wonder why certain areas of their body aren't growing. It's like, you should be pushing your lunges as hard as other exercises. You know, it's not a fluffy little exercise that you just, you know, you need to be like training with intensity and not just like going through the motions. And I like what you said earlier, it's going to be context dependent, because not everyone's goal is to build bikini pro glutes and do all that sort of stuff. And that's totally okay. But it's still important to understand like what's going to give you progress. And if you make an informed choice that you're like, you know what, I'm just cruising, and I've had phases phases like that, definitely, where I'm like, I'm so burnt out and I just want the training to make me feel better, more energized, not exhausted. So we just have to understand those variables as well. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the episode, please share it with a friend or share it on your socials, and don't forget to tag us.
Then off the back of exercise selection and programming, you know, our number one important topic around glute training, we've got technique, activation, and quality of movement naturally. So we've got our program. Now what do we do with it, right? So, and you wrote beautifully here, technique obviously matters.
Yeah.
Well,
Why do we have to say
obviously?
Isn't it obvious? But then you were like, oh, no, that's something to talk about. And I was like, are there people out there that don't think technique matters? Please educate me.
Yeah, so there are people out there who, their theory is that the body adapts to poor technique. And I'm going to use the deadlift for example. There are people out there that believe that if you deadlift with spinal flexion under heavy loads, that the discs, quote unquote, and I'm going to use quote and break this up so it doesn't get taken out of content, so they think I agree with it. They quote that the disc adapts under lumbar flexion. And we know, and there have been countless studies, that a number one cause of disc herniation is lumbar flexion under heavy loads where it surpasses your ability. You know, chances are you won't get a disc herniation bending down to pick up, you know, a paper clip off the floor, but do it with 200 kilos on the bar, we surpass our capacity for that load, and then we can get injured. So there are people out there that say, you know, keep using that poor technique and your body will adapt, where it is completely incorrect and very dangerous advice.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do think that good technique is different for everyone. Like everyone's technique is going to look different to some degree because we're all different, we're all built different, etc. But if you're getting pain, nothing's going to grow, right? Like nothing's going to grow when there's a pain signal there in your body. And something that I see all of the time, because I only work with women, and I make a generalization, a goal of a lot of women is to grow their glutes. It's just a very common thing. And then when you dive deeper to try and figure out, well, what's not working as well, like why do you feel like you're not making progress in this area? Back pain. Like a back pain. Everyone's got back pain. It's so common, right? And then when you look at technique from an RDL, and I feel like we can be very specific here because it's like, okay, let's see how you RDL, let's see how you go through hip extension. I can already see where the problem is, right? And it's just like, oh, okay, we'll fix that. And I know it's not always that simple, but it really is like the things that a lot of people overlook. It's I don't know, like it's so obvious to me, but that's why I wrote obviously, because nothing's going to grow if you don't sort it out, right? And if you've got pain, like please don't accept it. Don't be like, oh, well, you know, it's just been there for 5 years. Like, no, like, you know, there's ways around it. And if you're investing in yourself, like, you know, you need to be able to, as you say, movement's medicine, like be able to look at why it's not working. Why do you have pain? Because there's no point jumping to, oh, well, I just want to compete or I just want to build as much muscle as possible, when you actually need to take it back like 5 steps. And I know a lot of people hate that, and you would see it probably all of the time, right, Danny, where it's like, you need to go right back to basic foundation floor work, like no loads, and it'd just be really hard for people.
Yeah, and you said it so beautifully. Like, for example, you mentioned if someone came to with pain, you clean up their technique and then they're out of pain. If only it was that easy all the time. In a lot of cases, it is just a matter of cleaning up your technique in the gym. Most people don't actually know the correct technique, so then they do that time and time again, which goes back to our first point, technique does matter. Otherwise, you can highly likely get injured. So awesome point. And then you have the people that no matter what position they get in with perfect technique, and again, perfect looks different for everyone, they're still in pain. And that's a lot of the population that I deal with, particularly around lower back pain. Most of my clients are lower back, knee and shoulder. And there's no coincidence because
like, well,
look how I know, well, true, there's nothing organ, I don't know, there's nothing left because they are all connected. Society has molded us into these human beings like us right now, sitting down. Our glutes aren't being utilized. We're in hip flexion, our arms are forward, a little bit of forward head carriage, probably more from me, so it's a bad habit. But then we take that movement into the gym. So our body molds to the chair that we've been in all day. We take that straight to the deadlift bar. You can have all the cues in the world. However, your dominant structures will continue to dominate because that's what they do best. They're really strong. It saves our body energy rather than recruiting the lagging muscles. Let's just use our lower back. It's strong anyway. Let's just use our hip flexors. They're strong anyway. Glutes and core often get a holiday. And people get confused because they say, oh, my hip flexors are really tight. I'm just going to spend an hour foam rolling, dry needling, massaging. That works for a short period of time and it feels good, so people keep doing it. However, that's where muscle activation comes into it. And this is, again, with my acute and chronic pain patients who can't fix their pain just through simple technique correction. That's where, as you mentioned, floor work, take it back to basics, actually teach them how to forcefully contract the glute muscle, but without allowing their lumbars to take over, without allowing their hip flexors to take over. So that's where I use muscle activation. And again, a lot of uneducated people have talked down on those two words, but I know for a fact that they simply just don't work with the same clients as me, because muscle activation doesn't mean burning out a muscle until fatigue. It means, cool, you get a lower back pain patient, they've got a really weak core, they've got really weak glutes, so that means they're really bad at hip extension. They just bend from their back like a noodle. Okay, it's my job to then get them into a position, often using the floor because of gravity. Okay, get them into a position where they must perform the action of the glutes. We'll use the sideline clam, for example. Their job is to perform abduction and external rotation at the hip without their lower back kicking in. Once they achieve that movement, they've learnt a new skill, which can be transferred into the knees out cue. They've learnt the new skill, they've started strengthening the glutes, and they've inhibited the stronger muscles. Now, I hope you don't mind me. I'll get a tiny bit sciencey, but I really want to explain muscle activation correctly, again, for the people who are confused, because I'm just so passionate about how much of a difference it's made to my patients and patients everywhere, that it's so important to understand that we have muscles that are strong and muscles that are weak. Now, there's a phenomenon called reciprocal inhibition, and it means when one muscle's working, the muscle responsible for the opposing action can't be working, like a bicep curl. Your biceps working, so your triceps loose. If you're doing a tricep extension, your triceps on, your biceps resting. The same with the glutes and the hip flexors, okay? So take it back to the desk worker sitting all day, their hip flexors are strong, they're active, they're ready to rock. Their glutes are not active because they've been inhibited. So rather than stretching out your tight muscles, they're just doing their job, rather than stretching them out, foam rolling them out, how do we inhibit them? By activating the opposing muscle. We inhibit the hip flexors by activating the glutes. So that is a roundabout way to quote unquote relieve tight muscles, take away pain for a certain area, simply by exercise rather than just, trying to always stretch out the tight muscles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's something that's like very close to your heart as well, because
it's my job, man.
It's your job. It's your job. And I think it's so important to like educate people on like what you do, right? And like why this is important to you. And you hit the nail on the head, because to who and to what for, right? A lot of people, like, they just don't understand. And look, I'll give you some context, right? Like I work with a specific type of client, right? I don't deal with chronic pain. Like, people come to me, but we can usually clean it up. Like you said, technique, I can see the problem, etc. We have someone internally as well that if things don't go to plan, she's got a different process, different exercises, different lens, different ways of looking at things, right? Because they're technically a different type of client, right?
Yes.
And it's so important to have that. And we turned that in-house because what was happening is we were having clients that were coming in with some of that stuff, and I would refer out, and they would end up worse off, to be honest. And I was like, what? Then I was like, we could probably do a better job, of just like tweaking things through movement, through technique, right? Rather than them just getting some deep needling, and everything has its place, don't get me wrong, but I'm just speaking from experience and sort of what's worked for us and what I see a lot in the fitness industry. And like you said, healthcare, because I was like, oh, patients, you know, you've got a different lens, and I'm like, clients.
True.
Health and fitness, right? Like they are said as health and fitness together, but they are so different. And I think a lot of what we probably both do is try and bring those worlds together, because they shouldn't be. At the end of the day, like health is physical fitness, and physical fitness is a part of health. So we need to be like doing our clients justice and making sure that we are referring to the right person. But like I said, I've been let down multiple times as well, because you want to be realistic where you send people if they want to see someone in person, etc. So there's lots of different pieces around the client. And I was reminded of this recently, where my dad had a shoulder operation, I think it was. He was racing someone in Rome. Don't ask me.
Racing someone in
Yeah,
Rome?
he went to Rome and thought he would do, I don't know, at some track, thought he would go for a sprint, fell over. Anyways, literally. So anyways, and as my parents have aged, I hate seeing your parents get a little bit older, don't you? But my dad's lost like a fair bit of muscle as he's gotten older, and like they didn't get the opportunities like we did to look after yourself physically. And he's grew up on a farm and hard worker, and his job's very physically laborious, so never did any sort of weightlifting or anything like that. And I've been giving him some exercises and assigning them to him on the app and doing that sort of stuff, and showing him some movements, and like it's humbling, and it's important to understand like that's who you're talking to for some of those things, right? Not everyone, but it's important to understand that not everyone is you, like as a client. If you're a coach and you're in the gym and you're strong and fit and healthy, etc., and your goal is to build your glutes, like we've been sort of talking about, but not everyone is you, and some people just need a completely different approach, and that is so okay. And the old sort of saying, like, the less you know, or the more you know, the less you know. It's sort of that context when it comes to coaching as well, and just like building muscle, and then realizing, oh, it's not just building muscle. Like, it's so much more. Like, muscle building is just such a tiny part of coaching and what we do. So yeah, I just wanted to just share that, because it was something that was reminded to me to be like, oh, okay, like, let me show you this exercise then. Like, I'm not going to give you a goblet squat, not even at that. I'm going to give you something on the floor, something with a band, body weight, breathing, core, like all of those sort of exercises that I know a lot of people on the internet just like talk down on, but they're just applying it in the wrong way, right? And I think to me, I'm almost like you're just misinterpreting what everyone's talking about.
Yeah, no context and greatly misinterpreted. And the thing is, your experience is so common where you try to refer out, but you can't find someone that can, help the problem, but also you can't find someone who aligns with your values, which is movement as well.
Yeah.
So
why is that so hard? I just thought, I don't know, physio, I think movement, and like, I don't know, I just would have thought that would have been the context, like right in my program. And then when I realized when they were coming back worse, and I was like, oh.
I'll tell you why. Because in university, no matter whether you're studying osteopathy, physiotherapy, you're a chiropractor, exercise physiologist, highly evidence-based, okay? We've all been to, you and I have been to uni. You remember writing essays, they all have to be evidence-based, right? Again, goes back to our topics that there's not one study on everything. Yep. And there's only so much you can teach someone in 5 years or 4 years, however long we were there. It takes a great amount of time and money, again, not only to make a study, but then to change coursework. So the missing link, whether you're a physio, osteo, chiro, is exercise. We are not taught how to move well. We're not taught how to get into the gym. Out of a 5-year so-called health degree of osteopathy, I learned anatomy literally inside out, but then we had 1 unit on movement. So I'm here today with my experience because it was just, I'll call it luck or fate, that I was obsessed with the gym just as much as I was obsessed with learning at uni. And like you, with being a nurse and then being at the gym, the worlds were separate. So in our own way, you and I have started to bridge that gap, because when I was a PT, I was learning how to make people feel better through movement. But then when I was an allied health professional with years of study, our end goal was also to make people feel better. But the difference I noticed with with not teaching them how to move better and just being really hands-on, they would come back because their muscles would still be weak and strong. They'd have the same movement patterns. They'd go home and do the same thing, or they'd play their sport and do the same movement patterns. So that's when it dawned on me quite quickly. I go, we need a little bit of both. But again, that was through competing, having, skipping classes and going to the gym sometimes. So we were our best project, so to speak.
Yes.
You and I as well, bridging that gap through our own trial and error. So I can't blame them for not knowing, but I can blame them for saying, that what we do isn't correct, or offering exercise advice or advice telling people to stop training when they actually don't understand what correct movement is. So it's just what they were taught. It's the therapists that have actually had their time in the gym, gotten under a bar, doing the hard work. They're the ones that you want to go to if you're in our industry with clients in the gym. They're the ones you want to look for because you know that we're aligned.
Yep. I know this is probably not right, but
I know. What's coming?
Never trust a health professional that doesn't lift. I just feel like, and that's me, that's my own bias, because it's such a big value to me. Like, I just don't understand how, if you're not physically looking after yourself and if you don't see physical health and training, and I'm not saying like train like a bodybuilder, I'm just saying like resistance training, right? Whatever that looks like, once a week, whatever. But when you push physical strength and rehab and all those sort of things onto other people, but then you don't do the one value to me that I think is most important for preventative healthcare, that just sort of like, I don't know, it's a red flag for me. And I know there's probably a lot of fantastic physios and healthcare professionals out there that don't lift, but I'm just saying, one of my prereqs is that, like, I just need to know how you train, right? And like what that looks like. And it's not like, I think when we look at injury, because this is probably the most unsexy podcast on glutes.
I love it. I'm so, I'm very excited.
It's the stuff that no one talks about, because like, a 30-second reel that's like, the 3 best exercises to grow your glutes. It's like, give me some context.
Yeah, man.
Like technique, right? For them and for who and for what. Like, we can definitely talk about the best exercises that are going to stimulate muscle growth and like, big long list of those, but it doesn't start there for it. And, I was having a thought the other day in the shower where all good thoughts take place, but how like a lot of like, I don't know, like advanced bodybuilders and I guess bikini pros and that sort of like category, I should say, sell programs to beginners as well, like their training programs. And I had a conflicting thought, because I definitely used to do this, where you sell training programs to beginners, right? I'm at sort of level 5, right? And level 1 is learning good technique, right? And this, coaching needs to be accessible and affordable and all those sort of things as well, disclaimer. But what's best for people is to actually go through a really solid foundation phase right at the start. Like, if you're new to lifting, or even in your first couple of years, you need to go through a foundational phase, right? I skipped that. That and paid for it, because I didn't go through this mundane phase where I just learnt the boring movement patterns. This is something I take clients through, and I'm sure you do as well. It's like, right, back to square one. I know you want to do the most optimal hip thrust with 60-degree, blah, blah. I know you want to do that. I know that's, the workout you've saved, etc. I know that's the program you want to end up doing. But we actually need to go back to this, because it's going to lay the foundation. Like technique, you need to just get that right. You need to know what it feels like, because when you get under a heavy bar, like technique is usually going to break down in the long run, right? Like the heavier you go, you're like eventually, okay, like technique's starting to falter here. So a really strong foundation phase is so important. And I know Eugene won't mind me saying this, but I actually wrote a program for his app called Women's Foundations, because I'm like, your female programs are like intense, right? Like they are so intense. And you need something for like people that are just coming into the gym, to do these tasks or these exercises that are not beginner, but not like complex, or not like, I don't know, like super intense, not all these intensification methods. Like you need something that's, appropriate for beginners to learn those movements through exercise. And then you can build up to all those fancy drop sets and other sort of exercises that, you want to do. And I just feel like people skip chapters and skip stages, and that's why they can sort of, you know, have to regress in the long term.
Totally. Learn to appreciate and respect the basics.
Yeah.
But then the thing is, it's forever. I know you mentioned phases, and we do go through phases. However, if our client is sitting down for 8 to 10 hours a day, then they need to regularly get down on the floor, do some planks, you know, get their core working. They need to extend their back, get that mobility in, do their glute work, because they are counteracting it with 10 hours of sitting a day. So they have not earned the right to skip that foundation because of their postures as well. So then you do get those clients who need, and all of us, you know, no one is up and moving 24/7 in great technique and posture. So that's where we use the gym as a tool, or use exercise as tools to then balance out our imbalances, strengthen our weaknesses. And it's a lifelong thing. If you're going to be an office worker for 30 years, well, for 30 years, you're going to be strengthening the muscles that are inhibited due to your posture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best investments that I ever made for my own training was in person, like sessions, right? Like I've made a lot of investments, spent a lot of money on my health and fitness, but right when I started, I didn't do that right at the start, and I just tried to figure it all out on my own, which was still super value. I look back now and I'm like laughing at it, but I don't know, a couple of years in, I invested in like some coaching from an in-person coach, and I still to this day like invest in in-person sessions from different types of trainers, and I just love learning from people, and I just feel like being able to get some hand-on experience, and of course you can get this in an like online setting too if you would like to, but if you're really struggling and like you've tried a few different things and you've watched some tutorials and you just can't nail it, honestly, like it's just a no-brainer for me. Just at a couple of sessions, you'll be so surprised at like the light bulb that just goes up when you feel your glutes for the first time. You're like, oh my God, like I've been doing it so wrong. And then once you can sort of get the feel for it, you can take it into your own training, because I just feel like a lot of people try and just go the cheaper way, which is fine, like I said, but sometimes we have to invest to get ahead.
Totally. So well said. And that rolls into our next point, being intensity and load management. Okay, so we got the program, we've mastered our technique, now we can get intense if we want. When do we push and when do we pull? And it's so interesting. People think that the basic exercises are not going to create muscle growth, but to the right person, it actually will. I'll take my mum, for example, who is active at work but does not train anymore at all. You know, so she had a sore hip. I gave her some glute work just with a band at home while she was watching TV. There's no friggin' excuse for her to not do it. I go, Mum, you're sitting down, just put a band around your knees and press your knees
Come
out
on,
about
Mum.
against the damn
Paula?
band. Paula, bless you. Shout out to Paula and Colleen.
Thanks for always believing me, Mum.
Good on them. So she actually got DOMS. She's like I didn't expect anything. The next morning, she's like, oh my goodness, like I've got that muscle soreness thing. She didn't know what DOMS were. My bum's sore.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, there you go. So it is load dependent. To someone completely new, you can achieve the right amount of stimulus for muscle hypertrophy in the right setting, even just with a band. So it's all context dependent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, it's a novelty stimulus, right? And I think a lot of people think that, like, I don't know, I've sort of go both ways. Like, I like a bit of muscle soreness to know that I've hit the right areas. I think it's a good sign of, like, you may not be sore all the time, but it is a good sign that you're sort of targeting the right areas as well. And the last point that is so important is under eating. And this is something that, working with women only, I see so often, because, you know, generalizing, but stigma's told us to eat like birds, and to not fuel our bodies with, like, you know, high amounts of calories, high amounts of carbs. I mean, like, even when you think back, low fat, low carb, like all of those sort of things, they aren't applicable if your goal is to grow your body, grow muscle, or even if you're an athlete, you're playing sport, like all these things, you need to be fueling your body properly with the right amount of calories. And even like calorie calculators, you know, they're a great starting point, but calculators aren't coaches. And I think that underfueling is one of the biggest contributing factors, is to why people don't make progress in that area.
Oh, yeah, because people are drawn straight away to the best exercise, the best method, the best program. But you can be ticking all the boxes on your training, your technique's good, you know, you're allowing enough rest. But if you're not giving your body the fuel it needs in order to grow, in order to perform, you know, you're not going to get the results. And it was evident when we were, you know, it was comp prep, we were severely dieting down in order malnourished to use that word. Yes, we were malnourished during comp prep because that's the goal, right? Get down. You can't grow muscle in that state. You know, obviously that's an extreme, but we've been through it even before we started competing. Running, playing tennis, you know, we were a lot smaller humans. And yes, we learned how to train well, and that was one part of it, but we also knew how to appreciate the building phase and to actually use that food as fuel towards our target muscles that we wanted to grow. Obviously you can't say I'm going to eat this, going to go to my glutes. So I don't want people to think that, but we need to eat enough to fuel our training. And it's forgotten because it's not sexy.
Yeah.
You will lose your abs, you know, your pants might not fit, you're going to feel bigger than normal. Like, they're not selling points, but that's the reality.
I do feel like, though, a lot of women are more inclined to go into building phases now more than ever. Like, don't you think even the last couple of years, whereas before that it was sort of uncommon, whereas now it's like, oh, like, you're building? Yeah, cool, me too. It's sort of like a bit more normalized because, as you mentioned, you can do all the training stuff, but the nutrition has to support it too as well. So, like, yes, the training's really important, but so's the nutrition. You can't really ever have one without the other. Like, you can't just have the nutrition, like you said, and not be doing the training because it's just going to be like accumulated as body fat. So being able to see the importance in that, and then making sure that you're pushing your calories up as well, and really pushing the top end of what your maintenance is, and if you feel comfortable going into a surplus, that's so important for growth too.
Absolutely. I mean, we're definitely going to have a whole nutrition podcast, but we didn't want to leave this point out because it is equally, if not more important than all of the others. You know, we need the right amount of fuel for our training.
Yep. One question that I actually do have for you is, how do you keep clients motivated when they feel like they're going backwards if they're injured? So strength-wise, often we can use that as our metric for progress, but if we get injured, how do you encourage clients or teach clients that regression is a part of progression?
I love that. And of course, it's so common, right? A lot of my clients, and I know you'd get the clients as well, who love training so much that they identify with going 6 or 7 days a week. Now, you and I both know that you don't have to do that, but it's not as simple as saying, okay, you need to regress or you need to pull back. Okay, the client is so attached to that. It's a part of their identity. So I'm going to use the example, but CrossFitters, okay? It's not because I hate CrossFit, but people just take it so far.
Intense. Yeah.
It's intense, right? For the right people, it's great. For the wrong people, it can be a recipe for injury, okay? So they call me up or we have our consult and tell me they hurt themselves in CrossFit. So I don't straight away say, oh, you shouldn't have been doing CrossFit. It's like, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. And it's about educating them on the mechanism of injury. So then they might recognize, yeah, I did go a little bit too hard. I got a little bit competitive and then my technique, you know, went to the side and I was just more focused about lifting more than Susan in my class, who she always beats me in everything. I wanted to beat her, you know. It can get quite competitive, particularly in those AMRAPs, you know. As many reps as possible, over and over and over again, really fast. You get tired, your technique, you know, falters, and that can be a mechanism of injury, not to mention not allowing enough time for recovery. So educating them on why they were injured perhaps in the first place. It's never one answer. It could be a series of poor lifting at home and then that was just a cherry on the cake at CrossFit, okay? So I'm not saying that it directly causes injuries, but okay, let's get educated. Let's educate you on why there was an injury. Then we put a plan in place. I let them know my methods, my way of practicing, and that does involve cleaning up the technique. So if you're doing a clean and snatch all day, every day, or a barbell deadlift all day, every day, but the technique's not right, we need to actually break down that movement. So people think of that as regressing, but it's learning new skills. I try and reframe it in a positive way. So you're not going backwards, you're actually going forward because you're learning technique, learning new movement patterns. You really get to learn how to slow down the movement, like how we love training. Time under tension, not just bang, 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 go, go, go. Because people carry their personalities into these classes and they think, oh, I have to always be on the go. So it's about reframing it and saying, these are your new challenges now. Try and be present. Try and use training as a meditation. Reward yourself for not just having more weight on the bar or doing more reps, but to actually learn the movement properly. So it's about reframing that and then letting them know that they will be able to get back to their activity, but it's just under different circumstances. So you have to I create it like a little game. You have to go through the checklist, tick off every stage, allow for rest, allow for learning correct technique, and then we build back into the activity that they really love. But often on the way, they might change their mind about what they were doing, or they might realize, hey, I actually do want more rest. So more often than not, they don't go back to doing 6 to 7 days a week of crazy exercise. They have new values now. So it's about allowing them to feel like they understand the why, but then also giving them steps in order to get back to doing what they love. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and hit follow so you can stay up to date with our weekly podcast.